Hello Internet, I'm Zahn, and welcome back to the second episode of Drawing Commentary as part of the Design Retrospective for the year 2019. Like I mentioned in the first recording session, the point of these videos is to take a sample of works posted over on my DeviantArt site over the last year, and in that sample, pick out some designs that I felt were either noteworthy or that I liked more than some of the others, and put them into chronological order and talk a little bit about each design as a way to sort of reflect on the design process over the last year. The last session focused on the pixel sprite designs, and for this we're going to be looking at the two-dimensional designs created in Rhino. We'll go ahead and get started. The first design in the sample was posted on January 4th of 2019, and this is the design for the creature Triconic. And I mentioned it a little bit in the previous session for the sprites. This design comes from the game Jurassic World Alive, which is a mobile game that I'm currently still playing that is very similar in design to Pokemon Go. I did some design work for some of the dinosaur hybrids in the game, and I picked out a couple for the sample here. I think we'll see at least one more a little bit later. But Triconic is a bipedal Spinosaurus type hybrid. It has an interesting color pattern in game. It almost looks more like a zombie in its color patterning on the different parts of its body, and it was one of my favorite units to use in the arena for a while. So it was one of the first designs I attempted in Rhino for this particular series, and the way I did this was by setting up a basic pose for the piece, and then once I had the pose drawn in, start putting in the details for the specific creature. Similar process to the Monster Hunter circulars, and the main difference being instead of a circular format, this series is a lot more freeform in that I choose different poses and then draw in all the details. Overall, it seems to capture all of the major themes. Triconic has these long spines running along its neck and back, and I wanted to make sure to include that along with the specific texturing on things like the neck and the limbs. And overall, this project is fairly challenging because the dinosaurs have a lot of details, and I haven't been working on it as much lately, even though I'm still playing the game. Depending on how things pan out in 2020, I may go back and draw some more of the more recently added creatures, since there's a pretty diverse library of actual and fictional dinosaurs to pull from, and that might be something that I revisit later. Moving on, this next design was posted on February 1st of 2019, and this is the circular emblem for Jade Bharath from Monster Hunter. And this particular design was based off of the original Bharath design, one of the older circulars, probably one of the first ones I did way back when. But Bharath's subspecies, the Jade cousin, is an ice-based brute wyvern. So when I took the original Bharath circular, I redrew a bunch of parts, specifically focusing on the head and the tail, and I added a lot more features that would be akin to the ice element. So if you compare this one to the original, it's got some pretty key differences. The pose is very similar, but angled a little bit differently. The texturing on most of the body parts is different. And I've given this sort of subspecies remix treatment to a lot of the Monster Hunter designs. I'd say the majority of ones that have subspecies I've drawn a variation for. I'm constantly going back to try and add more, since there's a pretty large number of alternate species from the main cast and even newer monsters, especially with something like Iceborn introducing some more. But it is an interesting experiment to go back and sort of remix themes and ideas from an established design to create something new while still working off of the source material from the creatures in game. Moving on, this next one was posted on February 4th of 2019, and this is the Thor. Just like the Triostronics posted on in the beginning, this is another emblem type design from Jurassic World Alive. The Thor is an Allosaurus super hybrid and contains components from a couple other different types of dinosaurs, specifically the Sinoceratops, I believe, is where the horned frill on its head comes from. The Allosaur body type is a major through line, and the spikes that you see running along its back and on its limbs comes from one of its hybrid components, which is the Tarbosaurus, sort of T-Rex looking spiny large predator. And in the meta, I'll talk a little bit just for a second about what draws me to Jurassic World Alive. I haven't been playing as much Pokemon Go lately, but this game I'm still playing pretty consistently. The main function of Jurassic World Alive is primarily based around exploring and collecting dinosaurs and leveling them up, but there's a pretty noticeable competitive aspect where you're creating teams and fighting against other people in real time in the arena. So there's a pretty big emphasis on building teams that are functional and will be competitive against other people. And the highest tier of rarity of the units is the unique tier, where so the strongest dinosaurs in the game can be found. And Thor was the first of the unique tier that I created. Its components are not super rare, but it does take time to put into and actually create the units. And it functions like a fairly bulky but high damage dealing dinosaur. It's not super fast, but it has two abilities that can punch through defense and one that allows it to instantly go first and inflict a stun status. And I would say, based on all the hybrids so far, this one is one of my favorites and still stays on my team today because it's one of the highest level uniques that I field. So when I decided to put together its emblem, I wanted to go for a fairly standard lunging pose, and these Jurassic World Alive designs are side profiles primarily because it's the easiest way to show off the dinosaur details. But Thor also has a pretty good mix of greens and sort of teals, the sand-colored underbelly to its body. And in emblem form, it was an interesting challenge to get all the details together, but overall I'm pretty happy with how this one turned out. I don't think any of the JWA designs have been put in our store. The copyright holders for the Jurassic Park, Jurassic World characters tend to be a bit protective, so I'm a little hesitant to put up t-shirt designs based off of their characters, since the protective brand enforcements tend to flag things, even on Redbubble, even if they're not primarily based off of their branded logos or anything like that. Even original artwork based on their characters has the potential to get flagged. So that's the main reason why I don't put designs like this up for sale. But we can go ahead and move on. This next one, it was posted on February 15th of 2019, and this is another entry in the Sphere series, and this one's called Nightmare Slime. Picking up the theme that we saw in the Sprite retrospective of slime-type creatures. This one from the Sphere series starts off as a circular shape. All the quote-unquote sphere-type designs start off as a circle, and I cut out and add the details to the shape, usually to create some sort of face-type creature. But for this one, I didn't do too much to the overall shape. Instead, I focused on the patterning and texturing on the face itself, and adding the mouth, the sort of wide smile with the dripping sections in between, which seemed pretty reminiscent of slime-type creatures, was one of the more noteworthy things on this particular design. I went for a darker blue color scheme rather than a traditional stereotypical green slime color, just to switch things up. And the 6 eyes, I went with orange to create a color contrast. Overall, this design is fairly simple, but I do like the shape and expression. At some point, I will most likely be ordering a hoodie print of this one from the store to see how this particular color shows up. I believe this one's in the store now, I just haven't ordered a hoodie print of it. I don't do that fairly often since the hoodies can be a little more spendy, but I do occasionally like to see how the designs translate so I can make edits to the design, templating, or make any updates before I leave something sitting out in the marketplace for a while. Next up, we are moving into the month of March. This one was posted on March 18th of 2019, and this one is called Slivered Legion. This particular design is part of the Armada series of ship designs, and this is one of the hybrid fusion design types. I believe there was a couple entries from this series in last year's retrospective, but I'll real quickly just recap what the series is about. The hybrid fusion, unlike a lot of the other Armada designs, which are a single layer, in hybrid fusion I combine 2 layers. The top layer is the base, and it's one of the existing ship designs I've posted, and the under part is what's called the array, and the arrays are created from one of the other ship's components, usually rearranged or rotated or changed in some way so that it's not a carbon copy of the original, and then it's underlaid beneath the ship base. And the end result is that it creates a multi-layered ship design that has a bit more depth and complexity than just the single layer. And I work on this particular series off and on. There's a massive spreadsheet that I have that has all of the base ships and all of the possible combinations and all the names for them. And every time I create a new one, I'll put the pieces together and then check one of them off so that I'm keeping a running list. But overall, the project is pretty interesting because I get to sort of play around and remix some designs that I've created originally and then figure out how to put them together into this double layer like this. It's something I need to work on a little bit more. There's no speed drawing videos for these particular designs since it's just me playing around with existing patterns and then putting them together in Photoshop, combining the layers and then adding the dark strokes, so it wouldn't really be interesting to watch in video format. But I'm gonna have to make it a point to not forget about this series. Next up, we are moving out of March into April. This one was posted on April 8th of 2019. And this one is from the Elemental Circular Design series, and it's called Consecrated Vessel Del Riage. And in contrast to the Monster Hunter Circulars, which are all based off of characters and creatures from the Monster Hunter series, the Elemental Circulars is a slightly newer collection that I started doing maybe a couple years after I started the Monster Hunter Circulars, but these are all original designs that follow the same circular format, and like a lot of the other designs that I've talked about in these videos before, they follow the elemental alignment scheme as well. So this particular creature is aligned with the light or holy element. And in creating this one, unlike some of the other dragon type circular designs, I wanted to go for kind of a more insect-like creature, hence the long sort of centipede-like body and then the multiple limbs. The nice thing about doing these circulars using the identical patterns is I create a single section up here in Rhino, and I'll take that section and array it around central point 360 degrees and a certain number of segments. And what that allows me to do is create a uniform circular shape and not have to worry about rotating things into place by hand and aligning everything properly. And that particular feature I use a lot. I use it on quite a few designs, even if they're not circular in nature. And like I've mentioned on a couple of the Rhino specific videos, I don't know if regular off-the-shelf vector software, things like Illustrator or Inkscape, or Photoshop for that matter, have the ability to copy something around a central point. The array tool is extremely powerful in Rhino. It's one of the reasons why I like that software so much for doing design work like this. The shape and interface commands for things that would normally be used probably for CGI 3D modeling can also be applied in 2 dimensions to curves and curved surfaces. Hence, it allows me to do things like this relatively easily. And for that reason, that's why I've chosen to stick with that particular software, even though it's pretty unconventional for this type of work. And like I've talked about probably too much at this point, Rhino is expensive. But once I invest in getting the commercial license and I have it forever, then you guys can look forward to me no longer complaining about how expensive the software is. And so I'll own it and I'll be able to upgrade my builds easily as a result. Next up, heading towards the end of April, this one was posted on April 22nd of 2019, and this one is the emblem for Deceiving Frost Tree Omlu. And like we talked about in the sprite retrospective, the original design for this creature was a pixel sprite. This was the sort of dancing ice tree. And as a way to sort of mess around with the designs themselves, one thing I'll also do from time to time is take something that was created in sprite format and then try and create a 2-dimensional emblem type design out of it, or vice versa, depending on where the original came from. So for this one, creating the ice tree was fairly simple, using the commands to create the body and the face. The real detail and interesting part for this one came from the branches. Because the original sprite is done in pixel format, the amount of detail for things like the tree branches is a little bit limited. In Rhino, when I have a bit more free reign over how big I can make the design, it made something like creating the branches a lot easier. One, because I have more space to create lots of little splintered branches and create texturing. And 2, because I could array the whole thing or mirror it and create a symmetrical piece, then it cuts my work in half essentially. And 3, for the frozen fruit, which we can zoom in on here, unlike what I did for the pixel version where I drew everything by hand 1 layer above the main design, for this one I could create just the fruit shape in Rhino and then copy it and rotate each one all over the different branches and attach them that way. And then likewise, when it's mirrored, everything's copied over. So overall, the flexibility for creating detail is much greater in Rhino. So the pixel to 2D design process ends up resulting in them being a lot more detailed. But I think that's kind of an interesting exercise to do, and it's something that I try and do periodically just to experiment with the different designs and see how different they end up being in another format. Moving on out of April, we're now in May. This one was posted on May 6th of 2019, and this design is called Omnis Elementum Viral Sidra. And this particular series comes from the Sealed Ones of the Abyss design series that I update periodically. The Sealed Ones, I think there might be at least a couple more from that series I pulled for the sample. But the whole idea behind the Sealed Ones series is that they're these largely demonic or monster type creatures that were sealed away in another dimension because they were too dangerous. And as part of the general lore that I've built for things like the Summoner series, a lot of the challenge comes from taking different ideas and creating these monster type creatures. And for this one, the central body is almost plant-like. It's this large, slow moving main body that has all these tendrils on it, and kind of like the Gleeok from Legend of Zelda lore, the different heads it has float around autonomously from the body, and each of these different heads represents different elemental affinities. The dragonish one looks more like it would reflect the fire element. This bluish one would be the water element. The bird-like one would be the air wind element, and this one right here would be the stone element. And compared to some of the other designs in the Sealed One series, this particular one, obviously, it's more detailed. There's a lot going on with this one. It took a while to put together. And overall, I didn't have too many specific ideas for this one. I wanted to create some sort of multi-headed creature with a central body. And when I was drawing it on stream, I basically just kept adding more detail and experimenting around with it. And putting the body together resulted in what you see here, and then after that I went and drew the individual heads. Overall, it's a pretty busy design, but I think it's a little more unique compared to some of the other ones. The Sealed One's design series is a good chance to experiment around with more unusual or outlandish concepts. As interesting as that might sound, sometimes I'll put together a bunch of things and something very unexpected turns out as a result. But I do like this series as a way to sort of capture those ideas if I'm not doing something a little more straightforward. So that's how you get things like this with a multi-element, four-headed monster type design. Moving on, in the later part of May, we are posting this one on May 20th of 2019, and this one from the Elemental Sundial series is called Sandstone Grand King. And I believe we talked a little bit about the Elemental Sundial series last year. This series is heavily influenced by the Aztec sundial type stone carving designs. The whole point of it is to have a central face and portion here with different parts arrayed in a pattern around it, and then the elemental part of the name comes from the traditional or secondary or combination of both elements patterned around the perimeter of the design. And this one in particular has water, fire, stone, and wind. If I were to do this one over, I would probably align them opposite each other, so water and fire would be opposite, and then wind and stone would be opposite. But this particular entry in the Sundial series is actually very old. This is one of the first ones done way back when I started experimenting around with this particular concept. I want to say probably 5 or 6 plus years ago. The series is that old. But in addition to newer ones that I've posted, I have a bunch of these archive designs that I like to put up, ones that they're out there in the world and can be compared to the newer ones, but also to see how some of the techniques have sort of evolved in the design process since then. So that's one of the reasons for going back into the vaults, as I call them. And I think for the Sundial series, I've posted all the old ones. There might be maybe one or so lingering, but this series is one that I also need to remember to come back to every once in a while and try my hand at drawing something new. So if anything, these retrospective exercises are a good reminder on things that I need to just bookmark to revisit for future sessions when I'm drawing. Moving on, around the month of June of 2019, this one was posted on June 17th. And this one is called Cyclical Spiraler. And one of the biggest and most frequently updated design series that I draw in is the Organics series. It's a pretty broad classification. Things that have a more biological or organic look to it tend to fit into that series. And this particular one uses the array command that I talked about before. A lot of these ones that have kind of a circular or a pattern look to them primarily revolve around using that command to take a drawn section and copy it polar array wise around central point 360 degrees. In this particular case, the design was copied around 5 times. We have 5 individual sections that were rotated, creating kind of a rough pentagram shape. And the texturing and overall patterning for this one was meant to look sort of like either an alien flower or some sort of maybe mollusk type creature. And one of the interesting byproducts of using this circular polar array command is that you get these other patterns that are created in the middle. Things like this star shape here are the byproduct of creating something that's mirrored around symmetrically multiple times. And it's always interesting to see what happens with that, since it's never really intentional for me to draw things that way. It just sort of turns out that way by the end. But overall, I did like this one. This one might be in the store already. If not, it's on the short list to get added at some point. Most of the organics designs tend to be a flat black color, so I try and mix it up every once in a while and draw them in a different color, something that fits with the theme. Next up, we're in the month of July. This one was posted on July 15th of 2019, and this is another Armada ship design, and it's called Burst Mollusk. The Armada ship designs, as we saw with the Hybrid Fusion one earlier on, tend to be a more standard take on things like shoot-'em-up style spaceships. That was the main inspiration for that series when I started creating it. But every once in a while, I'll come up with a different design for the ships that's going to be a little more unconventional. This one looks like some sort of flying or even crawling crustacean-like creature. And I picked it because it stood out from some of the others. The Armada designs are really an exercise in free drawing. Every time I do them, I never know what is going to turn out when I start drawing them. And in this particular case, the ship design ended up being more like a mollusk type creature, which ended up setting itself apart from the others, which is why I picked it for the sample. I do like the sort of muted color scheme on it as well. Next up, we're moving along a little bit faster. Now we're in August. This one's posted on August 12th of 2019. This one is another entry from the Sphere design, and this one's called Xenotype Pathogen. Like I mentioned before, the whole point of the Sphere design is to create something that's based out of a circle shape and maintains that circular shape for the majority of the design. The specific patterning and everything that goes on in the middle is where the real challenge comes in. And this one was created as sort of an alien life form type design. The eyes, if you want to call them eyes, on the main face of the design are meant to definitely look more alien or otherworldly. And this one actually has some additional details that I don't normally do for the Sphere series, and that's the mouth over here with the acid-like drool coming down. That's not really a detail I typically include on these, but for this one I thought it'd be a good change as far as the color scheme and also just the overall style. And I don't think it takes away too much from the circular shape, and it definitely creates something that your eye paths to when you're looking through the whole thing. So this one is a bit more of a unique design from the Sphere series, but it has a lot of detail work on it, and so I'm happy with the results. And I believe this one is also one of the shirt designs I pulled and added. I would like to get this one screened too, but my concern is that because there's so much detail, it might not come out very clearly. It's one thing I'll have to experiment with. I'm sure the people over at Redbubble find my designs very frustrating whenever they have to screen them onto something like a shirt or a hoodie or whatever. just because there's a lot of fine detail, and I don't know how exact their screening setup is. But so far they haven't contacted me and told me to knock it off, so until they do, I'm going to keep putting up designs and putting them on garments or other products. Next up, we are now in September, getting towards the end of the sample actually. I only have a few more between now and December. This one was posted on September 6th of 2019, and this one is the circular emblem for Elder Dragon Velkhana from Monster Hunter Iceborn. And this one was drawn and posted in conjunction with the launch of Iceborn on console. What I've done every year, or every time there's a new Monster Hunter game, is I will draw a design of one of the featured creatures that's coming out with whatever releases is about to launch, and I'll post it on game release day as sort of a celebration thing for the community and just to sort of mark the start of a new series. And Velkhana is the flagship Elder Dragon for the Iceborn expansion. It's designed like a standard four-legged, two-winged Elder Dragon, but its main theme, as you can tell from the design here, is ice. It has the ability to coat itself, its body and wings, in ice armor, which forms all over its different body parts as sort of a spiky layer of additional armor. And interestingly enough, when Velkhana forms this armor on its head, it gets this long, jagged horn, and all over its head the ice forms a crown. When the ice armor is broken and it's not wearing this, it looks kind of like a regular dragon. But once the armor is in place, it looks like this regal ice king or ice queen type design, which is very, very iconic. I actually like Velkhana's design a lot. Fitting because Iceborn's whole major setting takes place in a snowy region. But for the actual emblem itself, I wanted to pay particular attention to the ice armor, since that's the main part of the design that everyone remembers. The circular shape, which I've used for the Elder Dragons, doesn't show their legs because it's primarily focused on the wings of the creatures if they've got wings. But this one took a particularly long time. It had a lot of small detail, and getting the texturing on the ice parts just right was fairly challenging. This one was definitely more challenging design than some of the other ones that I've attempted. But overall, I'm happy with the results. And the reception of this one was pretty good. People seem to like it on the subreddit where I post these every month. And interestingly enough, my father, who doesn't really participate in a lot of my stuff online, he does occasionally tune into my streams to watch the different designs and drawings, even though he doesn't know where most of these are from. This particular one, when I drew it, he happened to be watching, and even though he doesn't play the games, my father's not really a gamer, he liked the design enough to want to get it printed on a hoodie. And he asked me if I could order one for him after I posted the design. I think I drew it maybe a month or several weeks before the actual launch. And I told him next time I do a product test, I would order and screen one of these. And so I did that, and now he walks around with one of my designs on a hoodie, which is really cool. And he said he's gotten some comments about it, probably from people who play Monster Hunter and recognize this particular dragon. So I thanked him for, one, being interested in my work, and two, for being a involuntary billboard ad for my designs too. I told him if anyone comes up and asks where you got the hoodie, just tell them it came from redbubble.com and they can look for it on there. So that's kind of the story behind the Velkhana Circular. Overall, challenging design, and it turned out pretty nicely. We'll go ahead and move on. I think this might be the last one from Monster Hunter that's in the sample for this year. Next up, we're in October, end of October actually. This one was posted on October 25th of 2019. And this is an entry in the Demon Emblem series. This one's called Polgarva. And the Demon series, which I tend to draw entries sporadically throughout the year, all focus on face-type designs of random demon or monster-type creatures. And the ones that follow this format all fall under this particular, I think I call it the Summoned series online. And they're all series of monsters and demons. And this one, overall, kind of a combination of alien features and a lot of sharp edges. I imagine this would be some sort of extra-dimensional creature, and I tried to convey that concept by, one, creating all of the ridges, and it's got sort of a tall crown-like head with all the spikes on it, but also the color scheme, a mix of muted greens, grays, and black. Overall, the detail work turned out fine on this one. What I'd like to do for the Summoned series is take the face designs, and I think all of the ones that I've posted have been straight on front-facing angles, but to take those designs and create a fully realized render of the entire creature. Kind of like we saw on the Jurassic World Alive dinosaurs, where it's a full pose. I wouldn't mind doing that for the Summoned series, just to experiment more with the rest of the themes and see what the rest of the creature looks like. I think that'd be an interesting exercise, and I'll have to make a note to tinker around with that, since the series so far is maybe half a dozen entries, but I haven't really done much else with these face designs, so that could be a good experiment for the future. Moving on to the month of November, this next one was posted on November 8th of 2019, and this is an entry in the Geochromatics series. Might be the only one that I pulled for the sample looking at the list, and this one is called Slate Obelisk. And to recap the Geochromatics design series, that one is a lot more based around color emphasis and geometric type designs. So whenever I do an entry in those, I'll take a either single or double layered design and focus around a couple key themes and a specific color pattern. This one ended up being a lot more angular and geometric in nature, because it's meant to be like a stone carving, something you'd see on a temple or some sort of altar. Maybe a relief carved out of a stone service. And as a result, it seemed fitting to go with a mix of grays for the color scheme. And unlike some of the other Geochromatics series that we've seen, this is a flat single layer. Some of the other ones will have a backing layer to add to the color palette or switch up the detail a little bit. This one seemed like it had enough detail that I could keep it as a flat layer, not make it too busy. And I can't remember if this one has already been uploaded. This one might be in the store. I'd have to think and see how many of those Geochromatics designs have been uploaded. But we can go ahead and move on. Okay, we're getting out of the month of November, heading into December, the tail end of the sample here. This next design from the Sealed Ones of the Abyss series we talked about earlier is called Phase Flares or Jaga. And as you can imagine from some of the other things that we've talked about, one of the main inspirations for this particular design is the whole Illithid Cthulhu Mind Flayer type design. I haven't read a lot of Lovecraft, but I'm definitely a big fan of the monster design from a lot of that mythos. The Cthulhu-esque type creatures always seemed interesting to me. So I've attempted a couple times. There's another design I don't think is in the sample that I guess that design hasn't even been posted yet, but it follows a similar trend as far as these Mind Flayer type creatures. And because I hadn't really done this for the Sealed Ones series, it seemed appropriate to experiment around with creature designs for that. And as a result, you get this more busy version of that type of monster. You have the sort of Mind Flayer looking face with multiple eyes. The claws and limbs are a little more lanky, and it's sort of got a robe type outfit on. That's why it doesn't have any visible feet. But one of the main things that I wanted to include to sort of add to the whole tentacle theme are these long tendrils coming out of its body. And in the past, I've tinkered around with drawing things in this way using a couple different commands in Rhino. I found that one of the easiest ways to do this is to draw the entire section flat and straight and add whatever details I want and copy things around and then make it completely uniform, and then take that straight section and use the bend command to twist them and bend them into the right position that I want, and then just copy them around. In the past, I tried drawing them by hand in whatever pose or shape I wanted, and that ended up being fairly tedious. The bend command, kind of like the polar array command in Rhino, is incredibly powerful. I think for CGI type commands, being able to bend a surface is pretty handy when it comes to drawing and shaping things. But even when applying that to curves, it allows for creating stuff like this to be very easy as opposed to a lot more tedious. And overall, I think it helped at least add some of the more horror-esque type elements to this particular design. It is busy, but I think the end results are pretty fitting. Next up, we are currently in the month of December, heading towards the end of our sample here. This particular design, posted on December 9th of 2019, is from the Dragon series, the Triconic Council. And this one is called Golden Zeal Aurelos. And this is the side view of this particular dragon. And I can't remember if I included its other render in the older Design Retrospective, but this one is denoted as the side view because originally it started out as a front view of the dragon head, just like the Monster Hunter designs, which I'll post every once in a while. The Draconic Council is an original design series using the same types of commands, and what I've done in the beginning is create faces for these different creatures, either front or side, and then I'll draw the other perspective at some point later. And this particular design happens to be quite old. This one probably goes back 7 or 8 years, if not more, closer to the beginning when I started doing these Rhino emblems. But it still follows the same type of commands and style as a lot of the Monster Hunter and other 2D designs we've seen posted so far. Aurelos is a gold dragon, and it has this second face. I can't tell or remember if it's supposed to be a false face or an actual face on its forehead. And this was a little bit tougher to convey on the head-on version. When I went to draw the side profile, going back to that idea, it was a lot easier to add the details and make it look like it's an actual second face. So whenever I do multiple perspectives of the same design, if something is not coming across in one perspective, and sometimes it's easier to draw that in another perspective. And going back into the archives for this particular series is still fairly unposted. There's a good handful of designs that I haven't shown anybody yet that will probably go up throughout the course of the next year or so. And as they go up, we can talk about them. Next up, this is the last design in the sample. This one was posted on December 13th of 2019, and this one is called Vile Reaper. And this design marks the debut of a series that started in December of 2019, and that series is called the Blade Wraith Collective. And unlike the ship designs or the circular designs or the more broad series like the Organics, The collective is designed around a whole group of alien creatures, and the perspective for these is side perspective. All the ones that I've put into the design archive so far have been a left-facing side render, and they all have a different combination of alien themes and these central organs or circular components of the design. I have to look back at the original post. They may have been called cores, which would mark like the 5th series that revolves around something called a core. But each of the different alien creatures has this type of organ as part of their design. And for the Vile Reaper, it's located on its tail. And this particular design series started actually quite a long time ago. I want to say probably 5+ years ago. I started drawing different designs and dumping them into a folder just to store. This design series probably predates the speed drawing and YouTube era of my particular work. It's that old. But because it's been sitting gathering dust, I wanted to start posting the entries and also to pick up work on the series and start drawing again for these particular creatures. So in addition to marking the debut of the series, it's sort of the return of these alien creatures, and I expect to be drawing a lot more in the series throughout the next year, in addition to all the other series that we've seen so far. This will be a good one to mix up since it's a little bit different in focus. The creatures I've done so far, just looking at the archive, run a pretty big spectrum of design. They're not all little quadrupedal creatures like this. Some of them fly, and some of them are a bit larger. So definitely look forward to exploring that series a bit more and experimenting around with ideas going into the next year. And so that brings us to the end of the sample for 2019's Design Retrospective. Overall, 2019 was a busy year. There was a lot posted, and there was a lot of different types of content and different series worth of work to look at. The emphasis for 2020 will probably be on continuing to build on series that have been established and maybe have been neglected a little bit more, and also looking at potentially starting new design series. I don't really have a timeline in place, but as ideas come together, sometimes I'll put together a new series and put them out. I think with the crossover potential for the pixel sprites and the two-dimensional designs, I think we could definitely see a lot more to come out of that. I am still working on the Chibi Sprite collab, or technically not Sprite, the Chibi Design collab, which I didn't pull any from this particular past year, but that is a series that I'm still working on in collaboration with Tyvrid Kizuna. So I expect to be working on that some more. And in conjunction with all these different series that will show up here and there, and on Twitch when I primarily do my work on these, I think 2020 will be an interesting year just to see what comes out. I also have some more papier-mâché project ideas in the works that I'd like to get to work on. That's something that I haven't really covered on these retrospectives before. One, because I only post a handful of those papier-mâché projects in a given year, since they require a bit more work than some of these other designs. But if I can find an easy way to document and get all of the information together for those projects, it might not be a bad thing to talk about, since it's not a major part of my channel and my content online, but it is one of the bigger things that I work on sort of behind the scenes. So I'll have to think about that. It would be nice to talk about the different projects in that series outside of just Halloween. So we'll have to see what happens. In the meantime, once again, I'd like to thank you guys for stopping by and checking out these videos. I know it's kind of been a bit more of a long process of sitting here and listening to me talk, but you guys found it interesting as far as the design process goes and listening to me ramble about stuff that I did. But in the meantime, Happy New Year, and I will see you guys in 2020.